Welcome back to the channel and our third video in our Trench Crusade series. This week we will be painting the Heretic Priest, obviously one of the elites from the Heretic warband. So join me over at the desk and let's get to it. I'm Dan, you're watching The Hobby Void. So here's our 3D printed model. I'll put the information on the description about how we did that and what the settings were. And just a basic black prime and base. So last week, or a couple of weeks ago, you would have seen us paint the Artillery Witch. I want to kind of keep with this theme. And whilst the artwork is quite dark, one of our viewers pointed out that the Knights of Avarice might actually be a really good fit because there's lots of gold and kind of exuberance. So there's a little bit of lore to kind of prime us. So we'll go in with Retributor armor and lead belcher, or any of your favourite metallics. The Retributor armor was a bit bright, so we're mixing in the lead belcher and a touch of black just to drop it down, so it's not too, again, there's a lot of gold on this, so we don't want the whole thing to look like a Custodes model or a completely kind of gold knight or anything like that. Just blocking that, and then we'll just use some of the lead belcher or any of your favourite gunmetal type paints to pick out the other details. Now you notice there's a kind of belt, or almost like a corset. It looks as though it's made of tubes. Now the artwork doesn't really show what this is, so I'm going to assume that that's kind of like a flesh, and we'll pick that out shortly in kind of purple and pink tones. We'll use a little bit of lead belcher on the helmet. We're going to stipple this on with a dry brush because I want kind of an imperfect, slightly pitted finish. Don't want it sort of too pure. So this will just give us a little bit of texture and make that more interesting. Okay, so with the metallics done, we'll take a bit of Mornfine Brown, just block in this small chest that they're carrying here. And there's a large skull on the back there. We'll base coat that in brown because we're going to dry brush that shortly. So we'll take our purple and pick out this flesh belt. It's sort of arranged very neatly, but I'd like to think that there's some sort of dark or macabre type decoration going on, and there's various tubes and things coming out of the skull, and we'll match those in the same colour. So we'll go with the shabby bone or any kind of bone or cream colour. I find this dry brushes really well. I'm just going onto the dry palette there and mixing in some of the original Mornfine Brown just for the first dry brush because otherwise it's a little bit too bright. Then we will work up on a second pass there to pure shabby bone, and then we're going to add some white into the mix just for a very final, very light dry brush on those top edges, just to improve the contrast. And I was messy with that, so we'll cover up those that overbrushing with the purple. Okay, so here we are at this point. Reichland Flesh Shade I'm using here, or any sort of warm wash, just to shade the armour. This will put back a little bit of the warmth that the lead belcher took out, but again, it won't make that gold be too bright. I do prefer sort of a flesh type wash for gold. It does add a certain warmth to it, like you don't get with sort of Agrax Earthshade or a dark tone or a strong tone or anything like that. Being quite liberal here, obviously we'll go around and wick away any sort of heavy pooling, but I am being quite heavy with it and some good contrast. Really let the recesses go dark. just wick away anything where we think it's a little excessive. A nice bright pink here, dark hot pink from Pro Acryl in this case. We'll just add some depth now to these intestines or fleshy tubes. Again, you could just paint these metal if you want to keep things simple. I just wanted to get another colour onto the model. Just a basic highlight on these. Slightly diluted paint so it flows nice off the brush. Now what I've done, I've added some white to that mix. I'm going to go for a second highlight, but we're going to put some texture. I'm just trying to show you how thin it is there, as in it's not too thin, it's just that right level where it flows off the brush. I'm going to paint across the tubes just with little stripes to give it almost like a ribbing or a ribbed effect. Just makes it look a little bit more organic, a little bit more fleshy. And then some pure white, and we'll follow the normal contours of the pipes, just do some very thin lines, and this is just going to give it that kind of wet, glossy, reflective appearance, just in the top corners. So let's give this fabric some colour and some depth. We're going with Cabalite Green here from Citadel. You can go with any sort of dark green, and we've thinned it down, as you can see there, into a transparent glaze. And we've removed a lot of that off the brush. Just don't want it to run everywhere as if it was a wash. We're glazing with this, so just use very transparent layers, glaze those parts of the fabric that we think might just catch some light. So the upper creases, the bits where it flares out, the thigh there that's fabric as well. We'll work our way around the model. It's very subtle, it doesn't look as though it's doing a lot, but that's the key to getting a smooth blend here. Multiple thin, transparent layers. It can be a little bit tedious. You do get a nice result. So by the time I've got finished one lap of the model, the first bit's dry, so we can go again and just build up more and more colour slowly, covering slightly less area than the past layer. And third lap, colour starting to build now, and you can quite clearly see that there's green in the mix. So here I've added a very small amount of white into the mixture, kept it super transparent, as you can see. We're going for those real kind of creases. The tops of the creases, the edges, the bottom of the fabric where it's frayed and worn, and we're even painting a little bit of texture on there. Paint some rips and tears, and just adds interest to the model. Okay, and there's our fabric. Pretty much there. Just elevates it from being pure black, but it still reads as a very dark green or black. Forgot to paint the staff earlier as well, so we'll just block that in with Mornfang Brown whilst we still have it on the palette. Okay, so you can take any bright silver. I'm using Stormhost Silver from Citadel. Thin down very slightly. Just do a classic highlight on the raised edges of the armour. Also within the sculpt there is some sort of damage, there's some sort of chips and cracks, we'll pick those out as well. Certainly the lower edge of that scratch there on the chest, for example, we'll make sure that's highlighted. Again, we'll use the sculpt just to catch it with the edge of the brush. You don't need to do too much with the fine tip of the brush here. You can sort of use the sculpt to just catch those edges. Just makes the armour come alive a little bit more. Being quite liberal on that side of the helmet because we're going to have a light source from there as well, and then we'll just run it over the chains, almost like a little dry brush. Okay, I wasn't overly happy with how those sort of tubes were looking, so I'm using some Blood Angels contrast paint from Citadel, or it could be any transparent red ink, or even a red type wash, just to tint. Looking to just tint it. I wanted it to look a little bit more bloody, a little bit more fleshy. I think that's better. So using some cling film, food wrap or saran wrap, depending where you come from, I'm going to wrap the model in this because I'm going to use the airbrush to paint the top of the staff. You can, of course, use a normal brush. Just overall for me, this is quicker and easier. So we'll give that a coat of white, using bold titanium white by Pro Acryl, and then we will go on with yellow. Going for kind of a glowing, molten, and that supernatural energy. To keep it in frame, you'd see that I just covering that in yellow, so it's got a nice coating of yellow. Now go in Pro Acryl orange on the dry palette, and we're going to do a very sort of, I suppose, heavy dry brush. Quite happy for that orange to cover most of the surface, but it's going to leave the yellow in the crevices. Now again, when we're talking about sort of heat and things like that, the lighter the colour is where it's hottest, so it will be yellow where it's hottest, the outer edges will become orange, and then we'll move on to dark sea blue here for the very edges. So we're doing like a reverse highlight. And this is representing where just the tips and the edges are cooler than sort of the burning core. Again, not doing nice neat lines, this is more of a stippling. And then in the airbrush again, we'll take the same orange that we used before and we want to add some glow, some object source lighting or OSL. So definitely we're going to be seeing some glow on the side of the helmet. The left gauntlet there, the top of the helmet as well, will definitely be where the light would hit. Top of the knee. And I think then angling it so we're directly from above, so we're hitting the top edges of the armour on the chest. Again, from the direction of the light. Okay, so for some sort of gory effects, I'm using some, it's almost got a slight elasticness to it, it's hobby sort of cord. It's used for threading beads and making jewellery. You could use fishing line, or you could get away with just using glue or UV resin. However, I'm using the thread here to guide the glue, which will be Yoo-hoo. I think you can get this in most places. It's a really useful all-purpose adhesive, and it has a really stringy, globby effect. It dries quite quickly, dries clear. So I'm just going to manipulate that, run it down those cords, manipulate it into sort of dripping gore, and then we'll use Blood to the Blood God, or any transparent paint. You can mix some red ink with some gloss varnish. We just want something red and shiny here, and we're going to paint over that as if it were entrails, gore of some description. And then the old trick with an empty airbrush, blowing some spatter off a loaded paintbrush Of course, you can get a toothbrush or something and flick the paint. So let's have a look at our finished model. So before we started the special effects on the staff and the gore in the hand, we were about 45 minutes painting, not including letting the primer dry, and then another half an hour with those two final items. So we're about 1 hour and 15 minutes of painting time. We put a quick base on using some coloured texture paint to represent like a mud. And I think I'm really happy with that given the time that we've put into it, or rather the lack of time that we've put into it. I'm really happy with how it's come out. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Give us a thumbs up, drop us a comment, and it'd be fantastic if you were to hit subscribe as well. It means so much. Thanks for watching.